Budget considerations. Federal regulations require all budget items to be reasonable, necessary, and allocable to meet the intent and purpose of the funding source, and to conform to any limitations or exclusions of the federal award, including prior approval requirements and any applicable supplement not supplant provisions for the federal award. Reasonable means individual items of cost are linked to strategies which have evidence of effectiveness for meeting the cost objectives of the federal award. The cost must also be reasonable in terms of the amount allocated for the particular item of cost given the specific quantity of goods or services received for that amount. The LEA should consider the questions listed on this slide when determining if a budget request will meet the requirement of being reasonable. Some questions to consider. Is the activity backed by an accepted educational practice, or is there evidence to support the activity? Is the activity focused and clear enough to envision an intended outcome, or are the budget items supporting an activity that is vague or unclear? Is the cost of the activity acceptable in comparison to the expected return on the investment? Would the cost of the activity or program raise questions in the community? How would the community react to knowledge of the cost of the program? Aside from these questions, other questions could be, did you pay a fair price? And was competitive procurement used? If sole source, what was their reasoning? To be considered necessary, the cost must be generally recognized as ordinary and necessary for the proper and efficient performance of the federal award. Most items of cost are linked to a specific strategy, and the activities funded are generally recognized as ordinary and necessary for implementation of the given strategy. Some questions for the LEA to consider include, how is the service, supply, or material being purchased connected to the strategy and its impact on student growth? How will this specific service, supply, or material add value to and impact the goal of student growth? In the absence of this service, supply, or material being purchased, would the strategy or initiative still be able to be implemented with fidelity? Does your district have the capacity to use what you are purchasing? And does staff have the knowledge and skills necessary for the program? Allocable means that each cost is linked to a strategy. It also means it is clear that, based on the specific cost details, the strategy the cost is supporting and the item of cost likely meets the intent and purpose of the federal award. Questions for the LEA to consider. Do you have enough time to implement the cost? Is the program that bought the product using it? Is the program sharing the use of the item? And if so, how are costs being shared? How is the use being documented? And does it meet the intent and purpose of the funding source? The core requirements for all federal grants include reasonable, necessary, and allocable. If an expenditure meets each one of these requirements, it is an allowable expense for the grant. On the next few slides, we will examine budget items through this lens. One budget item a consultant may be asked to approve is behavior incentives. In this example, a district would like to use 25% of its $20,000 Title IV allocation to purchase Amazon gift cards to pass out as behavior incentives during the school year. Let's examine this budget item to determine if it is allowable. First, is this reasonable? All incentives must be nominal in value. One could argue that a $20 gift card is not nominal in value. It's also difficult to determine reasonability because we do not know the number of students this might impact. 250 incentives in a large district might be reasonable, but not in a small district. Secondly, is this necessary? Are these gift cards essential to the PBIS strategy trying to be employed? Perhaps, but more information is probably needed. Finally, is this allocable? This is where a consultant would have to say no. Amazon gift cards could be used to purchase anything. Incentives must be academic in nature. Since the district cannot guarantee the gift card's usage on academic incentives, this is not allocable to Title IV. This budget item is not allowable. In this next example, a district would love to send 5 of its principals to a national conference to learn best practices in education. Do you think this is allowable? Generally, out-of-state travel is not allowable and always requires special approval. Before taking it to a manager for approval, a consultant will be able to determine general allowability. This budget description and background information does little to prove that this training is allocable to Title II, Part A. Title II, Part A funds must be used to provide training that is sustained and ongoing. This one-time national conference is not sustained and ongoing. It also is not reasonable. There are state-level principal conferences that are much closer and more reasonable than sending principals to a national conference. Finally, this budget request is not necessary to the overall objective. Title II Part A funds cannot be used to expose principals to unnamed learning objectives. They must be used to provide targeted, sustained, and ongoing professional development. It would be considered unreasonable to use Title II funds to simply expose administrators to other best practices. For all 3 measures, this budget request would not be allowable and would not need to be sent to management for approval. This final budget item is one that a consultant may often see. While this budget item may be allocable, a consultant would need to ask if it is reasonable and necessary for a small Title I program with one Title I building. Generally, Title I administrators are needed in larger Title I Part A programs with multiple Title I Part A buildings. The director's position is used for program oversight at a district level, not at an individual building level. While it is under the 10% threshold for administrative costs, on the surface it does not appear to be a reasonable request. A job description would need to be examined first before making a final determination. In order to be allowable, the activities associated with all requests for funds must occur on or after the obligation date for the application and prior to the end of the 2022-2023 program period. In addition to the obligation date requirement, each request must provide sufficient information to show that the obligation of funds will occur on or after the date the request was submitted. Requests for funds should provide a date indicating the start of the activity, a planned date of obligation, or sufficient information that an outside reviewer would reasonably be able to determine that the cost will be occurring at a future date within the obligation period for the federal award. This is especially important during the amendment period or any time new items of costs are added to the application, which were not present when it was initially submitted. If funding is insufficient in the original application to cover all planned expenses, those expenses that occur first should be funded first. Expenses that may be incurred over the course of the year, such as personnel costs or ongoing professional development, may be prorated to cover at least 50% of the planned cost during the initial application, with plans to cover the balance of the cost at amendment time when carryover and final allocation amounts become available. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Section 8101-42, defines professional development as activities that are an integral part of school and local education agency strategies for providing educators with the knowledge and skills necessary to enable students to succeed. It clarifies that such activities should be sustained, intensive, collaborative, job-embedded, data-driven, and classroom-focused. Such activities should not be standalone, one-day, or short-term workshops. These activities must be systemic. As LEAs develop their professional development budgets, they should consider how they will show that any request in the consolidated application aligns to this definition. Simply listing a series of annual professional development conferences in the consolidated application without linking them to a meaningful strategy or identifying specific learning objectives for each request will not be adequate to demonstrate that they are systemic. All professional development requests in Title II Part A, Title I Part C, Title I Part D, Title III Part A, both EL and Immigrant, Title IV Part A, and Title V Part B must be supplemental. State law requires districts to provide 5 days of professional development each year to all teachers and an additional 5 days of professional development over 3 years for any new teachers. To be considered supplemental, all non-Title I Part A requests for professional development must be in addition to the required days of PD or enhance or expand what would have been done by the district in the absence of the federal funds. For non-Title I Part A professional development requests, consultants may require the district to provide additional supporting information, such as a PD calendar, to help demonstrate how individual professional development budget requests are supplemental. All professional development should align with the Michigan Department of Education's professional learning policy and standards. Out-of-state professional learning is generally not allowable and requires management approval. In order for a reviewer to determine if a request for professional development is reasonable, necessary, and allocable, as well as to support program and fiscal monitoring, each PD request should provide the specific details about the request as applicable and listed on this slide. These details are required, including the learning objective, the number of staff participating, the role or position of the staff, such as teacher, principal, paraprofessional, etc., the number of days or hours for the PD, the approximate time of year it will occur, or the exact date if known, the location, such as virtual, in-house, at an ISD, or the city where it will take place, daily costs for any staff, subs, or contracted consultants or PD providers, a detailed description of any supplies, materials, or other expenses, including the quantity to be purchased and the cost per unit. Please note that only supplies, materials, and other expenses directly required for the provision of the professional development and not those used for the actual implementation of the strategy are allowed as part of a professional development budget. Implementation supplies may be allowable in other program budgets, but are not a cost that is allocable to Title II Part A. If specific details for a professional development opportunity are not yet known at the time the application is submitted, the LEA should provide a description with reasonable estimates for the required information based on the tentative plans for the professional development opportunity. If the location is unknown, it will be sufficient to say, "to be determined." An estimate of the date must be provided to show why the details are not yet known, as well as to demonstrate that it meets obligation date and prior approval requirements. As a reminder, the function code for all professional development costs, including the costs of the presenter, should be based on the role of the staff member receiving the PD and not the role or the position of the provider. If the PD recipient's role is direct instruction of pupils, then the PD expenses should be under function code 221. This would include teachers, interventionists, and paraprofessionals. If the recipient's role is the provision of support services, then the PD expenses should be under Function Code 283, Staff and Personnel Services. Support services include all non-instructional roles across the following categories: administrative, technical, including guidance and health, and logistical support, including coaches and community services. For staff members with multiple roles, such as a teacher and an instructional coach, the district must determine during the budgeting process which role the PD is designed to benefit and code it accordingly. When PD is being provided to both instructional staff and support services staff and is billed as a single charge from the PD provider, the PD can be assigned to a function code based on the role of most of the staff in attendance. Some instances when this may occur include in-district PD, where there are expenses that are not itemized per person, and out-of-district discounted group registration rates for a conference. When costs are not billed as a single charge, for example, when there are per-person travel or registration costs, or other costs billed per individual, then separate budget items should be created that align to the correct function code based on the role of each PD recipient. In such cases, multiple individuals can be grouped together in a single line item if they fall under the same function code and it is the same professional learning opportunity. For substitute teacher costs, if the subcosts have the same object code, for example, purchase services, as the associated PD, they can be included within the same budget detail as the primary PD cost and should identify the daily or hourly costs for the service, as well as the number of subs needed. If subcosts have a separate object code from the associated costs, the daily or hourly costs for subs must be identified as a separate line item with a clear link to the associated item, either PD or staffing. Title I Part A budgets may include PD-related subcosts without also including any associated PD costs. In all other budgets, subcosts without an associated PD cost may be permissible if they represent the sole cost for supplemental professional development activities. For example, subs to provide release time for teachers to review and respond to student data in Title II Part A, or in cases where the associated PD costs are being covered by other supplemental funds or another entity. For example, subs for release time to meet with a Section 31A reading coach or for PD provided by an ISD. Let's now examine two approvable Title II budget item samples for personnel. Read the first example on the slide. In the first example, the function code is correct. The job description has been uploaded, and the LEA indicates what role the person will perform during the remaining FTE. Now read the second example on the slide. In the second example, the function code is correct. It is clear how many teachers will participate, for how many hours, as well as the hourly stipend rate. Also note, the LEA has provided an assurance that this activity will take place outside of contractual hours. Stipends paid for work done during contractual hours are unallowable. On this slide, we see some additional examples of approvable Title II professional learning budget items. Read the first example. In the first example, The LEA has included all of the required information for a professional learning budget item. The function code is correct, and they have included the title of the conference, the location and dates, how many staff will attend, and the role of the staff, in this case teachers. They have also included a breakdown of all the individual costs for this specific request. Now read the second item. The second item is a request for a book study for building principles. The function code is correct, and the LEA has indicated how many books will be purchased at what cost per book. They have also indicated who will be leading the book study, which is a required detail for this type of request. Title IV, Part A. Title IV, Part A is intended to meet the goal of high-quality education for all students by increasing access to a well-rounded education, improved conditions for learning, and use of technology to increase academic achievement and digital literacy. Allowable uses of funds include direct services for students, professional development for teachers and administrators, and supplemental educational resources and equipment. According to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Title IV, Part A, Section 4106 Assurances, each application shall include assurances that the LEA will prioritize the distribution of these funds to the schools with the greatest needs as determined by the LEA. Title IV, Part A supports three major strategies: well-rounded education opportunities, safe and healthy students, and effective use of technology. If the LEA receives a total Title IV allocation of $30,000 or more, they must budget a minimum of 20% in well-rounded education opportunities, 20% in safe and healthy students, and may budget the remainder to effective use of technology. If they receive less than $30,000, the LEA may use the funds for one or more of the three areas. Title IV, Part A contains a special rule related to technology. Only 15% of the total amount budgeted under the effective use of technology category can be spent on technology infrastructure. Please note this is not 15% of the total Title IV Part A allocation. If an LEA budgets zero in effective use of technology, they may not spend any amount on technology infrastructure. Infrastructure line items that are part of the other two strategies count against the 15% rule. They must be relabeled as technology infrastructure. Technology infrastructure for the purpose of Title IV Part A only is defined as devices, equipment, and software applications. Title IV Part A is subject to a 2% administrative cap. It may only be used to supplement programming and not to supplant. And it may be transferred to all other funding sources available in the consolidated application.